Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. We've got an interesting thing for you today. We're looking at a conversion kit for the VFC G36 for converting it to M4 magazines. Now I've mentioned this in a few videos about the G36 and it was being worked on by Clutch Precision, so I decided to pick it up, ordered it in, and it's arrived. So today we're going to be fitting this kit and seeing how we get on. So we've got a couple of boxes here. One will house the Magwell conversion. I also bought the steel bolt, and then the upgraded recoil springs were free if you ordered certain things from them. So we've got a nozzle, we've got a bolt stop, and then inside the final piece here we've got the Magwell itself. And this is going to convert it from using G36 magazines to M4 magazines from VFC. You can see here it's a polymer constructed Magwell, and you've actually got 3 mag releases on this Magwell. Looking at it, it looks a little bit rough, not terrible. I'm not really sure what process they've used to produce this part. It almost looks like it's been 3D printed and then sort of sanded down and painted, but we'll get to it. This is a P-Mag, I'm just testing in the Magwell, and you might be thinking, why am I doing a voiceover on a bench video? But it was so noisy outside the room where this is recorded that we just could not use the audio from the original video. So here the nozzle looks very, very rough indeed. You can actually see some of the print layer lines there. So I'm not sure whether they have 3D printed like a sacrificial nozzle and then cast them, or whether they're just FDM printing them out of ABS and doing some post-processing on them. But yeah, it's not the smoothest part. There are very much easier methods you could use to produce these parts, which unfortunately they haven't gone with. This is the bolt stop. It does actually look like in one area that it's been sort of shaded in with a Sharpie to cover up like a scratch. And this looks printed like a they do like metal powder printing where they hit it with a laser. It kind of looks like that. Now I also bought the steel bolt, which means we won't have to modify the original bolt. However, opening this up here, you'll see it's covered in sand. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure if they use some kind of process and it's just sand left over, or it's something to do with the packaging process and sand's found its way in there. It really is quite odd. And you might not see it there, but the pin that goes through for the charging handle, we've actually got a build up of rust as well. And then looking at the interior bore on this, where the nozzle sits, you've got a very rough surface with some deep scratches and pitting. This is the first set of parts I've had from Clutch Precision, so I'm not sure if this is normal or whether this is just maybe a bit of a QC issue on the one that I've received, but we'll get to it. Inside here, you have a different fork and spring for the charging handle. Again, this part is covered in sand. So I'm not sure whether they do like a blasting process to clean up some of the parts and it's found its way into the packaging, but it's actually where the charging handle spring sits into on the bolt. There's also a massive buildup of sand, but we'll get to that later. This is the free 130% upgrade spring set, which was free if you ordered certain parts from their store. We're going to remove the magazine and start stripping down this G36. So we can start pulling this thing apart. We can actually pull the pins out and store them in the stock on the G36, which is a very cool little feature of the G36. I'm going to pull the lower out, extract the recoil spring assembly, and then we'll enable us to pull out the bolt. And the main reason for me wanting to do this conversion is just the G36 mags are just not the easiest to get in pouches and such. So here's the original bolt compared to the steel bolt. You can see the geometry is a little bit different. So if you don't use their steel bolt, apparently you have to modify your existing bolt to clear the magazines. Now they do have an instruction manual that you can print out, so I just downloaded that off their website, printed it out, and hopefully it will help us in installing all these parts. So I'm just going to set this out to one side in just a moment. Just takes you through the process. Some of it does sort of have gaps in it where it's not quite clear what you're meant to be doing, but I'm sure we'll figure it out easily enough. First we're going to take the bolt apart. We've got a 2mm Allen key, countersunk screw here. It's a 2mm Allen key that you need to use. The threads I think is an M3. We pull that out. We've got another section which is like a plate on the front of the bolt. So we're just going to use a little Phillips screwdriver just to remove that screw. And then if we remove the steel plate and the little peg that's sat on the side that you can see there, we'll be able to extract the nozzle from the bolt assembly. So it's not a usual video that we do. I tend to film it as and when I do this. But this video did require quite a bit of editing to get it down to a semi-acceptable level. But you can see here how smooth the bolt is in the original. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of construction going on outside where I am, and it was just so difficult, especially on a hot day where you got to have the window open. It was just very difficult to do, so we decided to do it this way instead. Just going to punch the pins out on the nozzle here. You've got 2 pins you need to punch out. The one at the back will hold the nozzle spring. The one at the front retains the nozzle valve. So these do come fitted with an end pass valve out the box, which is nice. It's not something that you're going to have to, spend on top of with a lot of the VFC replicas. So we start the pins off and then we just use a bit of force with some pliers just to pull the pins out. Nice and easy to do, just take your time. Pull this pin out and then we should be able to extract the valve. It just pops out there. And we should just be able to pull the spring out as well. You can see this is the standard VFC end pass that they put on some of the models, but not all of them. We're going to extract the 2 O-rings. So the one at the back is like a ported piston at the back, so it will help stretch the O-ring out to cause or give you a good seal. And then you've got a secondary O-ring that just sits behind that. So this standard nozzle, we're pulling it out. Try and keep all these bits safe and to one side. And here we have the clutch precision nozzle. We're just going to fit the valve and slot these parts in. It's a little bit of jiggery pokery trying to make sure the valve sits in the right position so the pin doesn't strike it when you're trying to put the pin in. Again, I'm not sure why they've gone to or used this type of manufacturing for the nozzles. You could go to like an SLS or an MJF if you don't want to splurge on injection moulding, if it's like a low batch number and such like that. But we'll see how we get on. You never know, it might work absolutely fine and we have no issues. We're just going to tap this first pin back in. This is the pin that the end pass uses to push against when you're adjusting your power. The spring is a little bit more tricky. You just have to make sure you look through the hole as you're installing it and sort of catch the pin on that first loop of the spring. It is possible to get this wrong, so you just have to be very sure that you get it through that end loop and not through one of the coils. So I'm just situating it, holding it in place, and then I'm going to push the pin in. This one just goes in by hand, it's fairly loose fitting. I'm going to put the O-rings on. So I'll put the first one on here, and that should aid in getting this second one over that gap. So get these on here. These nozzle spring retention pieces at the back here with the threads on are not the easiest to install on VFCs. Now it does say in the instruction manual to make sure you give the end pass plenty of adjustment. So it basically tells you to turn the end pass until you can see the back of the valve just starting to poke through there like that. I'm guessing that the valve sits further back, or there's a bigger port, so it's just basically telling you to close it off. So we're going to start stripping down the rest of the bolt here. I was just trying to figure out what I needed to do here. I was hoping it wasn't riveted, but it's not. You just have to give it a good tap with something sturdy to push this pin out. There's the original fork. You see it looks a little bit different shape compared to the one that's been supplied, and I honestly think that this new fork that they've supplied was bent in transit at the back there, because with it the geometry like that, it won't actually allow you to install it into the bolt, which I find out soon enough. So you can see the original there, and the one with the kink up is the new one. Not really sure why they had to supply this part and why you couldn't just use the one that comes with it. So I'm just going to grease up the spring. The spring that comes with the steel bolt is much stronger. I imagine they wanted to give the charging handle a much better feel. I've cleaned the sand off this part, and I'm just going to lube it up to make sure we don't get any stickiness going on. So just applying some grease there. I may have already bent that piece down, I can't quite remember with the edits, but basically that bit that was bent up at the back, I just had to straighten it out, otherwise it wouldn't quite fit into the bolt. You've got this little collar that goes in the side of the charging handle like that. A bit of grease will help keep that in place. And then we slide the fork in like that, and then push everything in. Just be very careful to line it up and not let go, because this thing will shoot out with a bit of force if you were to slip. And then we're just pushing the pin back in. Again, the holes on the front of the bolt were quite heavily corroded, so I had to basically pull it apart and just clean out the rust and corrosion to be able to get it in. It's got a much stronger feel to it, but it does actually cause an issue, which we'll get into a little bit later in the video. Just going to apply a bit of grease to the back O-rings here on the nozzle. We're going to get some on the inside. So the surface inside the bolt is quite rough, but if it seals, it seals. We're just going to send it and hope for the best. We had a similar situation when we was working on the bolts for the Salvo Precision MCXs, and the samples that I had came back pitted and scratched like this, and I just rejected them with the factory. I said, you know, this type of this quality of finish is not acceptable. It needs to be nice and smooth. So I'm not sure why it's come like this. Maybe that's just how they are. Again, it could work absolutely fine. It's just an observation. So here I'm just trying to line up this tricky little bugger that sits on the back of VFC nozzles. It's got flat edges on two sides. We need to just locate that in place like that. And then just applying a little backwards force, we're going to put this countersunk screw in. But as we screw this little countersunk screw in the back, we're going to be very careful not to apply much front force. So we only want rotational force here, because if you apply frontwards force to this screw, it will basically push that little piece out at the back, out of alignment, and it can cause an issue. So we've got the little bit that sits on the side. This is very loose in the steel bolt. We also don't have the fixture on the front of the bolt like on the original to help hold the nozzle in place. So the nozzle sits very loose in this steel bolt. So usually you'd have this little metal plate that would sit on the side and screw in, and it's got like a little notch on the side which helps locate the nozzle. But on this steel bolt we can't fit that. Again, just observations that this part's very loose. It might work absolutely fine, and if it does, if it works, it works. Don't worry about it too much. So this little piece on the side here is the only real thing holding the nozzle in place and stopping it from rotating. So we're just going to grease up the bolt here, just get some grease in these little channels where it sits inside the receiver. I did apply grease to the sides that you see here now. I was just trying to do it to get the grease spread out in the receiver. This is not normally areas that I would apply grease. And later in the video when it's fitted, all the excess I end up wiping off with a microfiber. It's just a brand new part. I want it to go in, slide in nice and easy. And then once it's spread and we've put a few rounds through it, we can pull the bolt back out. Clean off any debris or dust or anything like that that's got in there. And reapply a normal stage of grease. So we slide the bolt in the back here. Pop the recoil spring assembly back in, making sure you locate it in the right hole. That fitted into place, we can close the stock. And this is where we start to run into an issue. So you see the charging handle's gone completely limp there. The fork has got stuck inside the top of the steel bolt. And we've just got no spring tension on this part. So it looks like we're going to have this bolt back out. But we'll get to work on the trigger assembly. And this is a long video, guys. I'm really sorry about that, but there's a lot to cover in this install. This trigger assembly is not necessarily difficult, it's just a little bit finicky. Not knowing the ins and outs of the trigger system and how everything goes into place. Just takes a little bit of getting your head around it, trying to locate everything correctly. So we're going to pop this pin out here first, which holds the hammer, and the hammer springs in. Just a little bit of a tap will help free it up. You want to use something that's roughly the same diameter as the pin to hold the hammer in place so you can extract it. Once the pin's been tapped out, we pull that out. We've got the two hammer springs on the sides. Just set this carefully to one side. When working on any parts like this, anything that has a spring, you just need to be very careful of, because it will ping across the room. It's the slightest lapse in judgment and these things will disappear into the ether. So we've got two screws, we've got one on each side. One on this side, there is a little collar that sits in there, we'll get to later. And we've got another one on the right side. We're just going to spin this one out as well. Pull this piece out, easy enough. Now the difficult part is getting this bolt lock out, and what we need to do is basically pick up the spring on the left side for the trigger, and we need to get it set out to one side. We're just going to set it to one side like that so it's out the way. Now comes the tricky part, so we've got to do a bit of finger gymnastics here. That little collet will fall out there like that. And we need to pull this part out, but there's two things in the way. We've got the valve knocker and we've got the trigger itself. So we're just going to kind of pull these to one side just enough. Might have to push the valve knocker forward so we can situate the bolt release. pull it to one side like that, and then to get it out the rest of the way, what we're going to have to do is just push that silver part near the trigger down as we rotate it backwards, and you should be able to pull it out like that without having to pull everything out of the trigger box. There's a little pin that holds these two pieces together, and we need to basically swap this over with the one that's been provided. That little collar just showing you where that sits in a little channel here. So let's get this pin tapped out. Just going to use something roughly the same size. Give it a couple of whacks with a hammer. Then use the pliers. Pull that pin out, which will separate the two assemblies. We put these back in. You do need to make sure this is seated all the way down, otherwise you're not going to be able to put this pin back in. So I just used some pliers to try and pinch it together, which got it most of the way. And then what I had to do in the end was just give it a couple of taps with a hammer. I think I tapped it with the pliers first, but just trying to get it lined up to get this pin back in. Doesn't quite want to go in, so I'm just going to tap it down with the hammer and go for round 2. Push this back into place. Just holding this against the pliers here to give it a nice flat surface. Tap that pin home. I'm struggling to do it on camera, so I just put it on the edge of the bench and give it a tap. Now, here's the tricky part. I need to reverse what we just did, but it will feel like it doesn't quite want to go back in, so all we need to do is we need to push that piece down there at the bottom, and as we push that we can bend that up into place, and then we're just going to move the valve knocker out the way the best we can to push this down behind it, and there we go. Make sure everything's centered and lined up again. Now we're going to show you where this little collet goes, this little shim or washer, whatever you want to call it. Just sits into that little channel there like that. What I did figure out is you don't actually have to do it like that. You can just fit the part as normal, and that little washer can go into the hole where the screw goes. Again, being a new type of trigger system for me, I was just being overly cautious. We're going to fit this screw back in. Just going to rotate that back in until it stops. Don't over tighten it. Same on the other side, but we're going to make sure the screw goes through that little washer or spacer, whatever you want to call it. Just spin it in until it stops. Like that. Just make sure everything's aligned, nothing's getting stuck on anything or seizing up. I'm going to place that spring back where it was, on top of the bolt release. Just make sure it works and it's sitting in the right place. Now comes the hammer. So when I'm fitting this now, as you'll see on camera, I don't quite get the springs right, but just be rest assured that I do come in afterwards and place the springs correctly. So what I'm actually doing here is the one on the right needs to go much further back into that little channel that you see underneath where the spring coil sits. So I fit it here, which is wrong. So I'm just trying to remember where everything goes. But not to panic, I do come back in and just, because as I put it together, I'm like, that doesn't really feel right, like that's where it goes. Come back in, fit it back as normal. So if you're thinking you've done that wrong, yes, you're correct. I've done it wrong, but I do correct myself after my brain has caught up with what I'm doing. I found two different ways to fit these springs in. You can do it like this and sort of push down the springs with like a little screwdriver like that to latch on the back. The easier way to do it is actually to let the hammer forward, and what that'll allow you to do is just to pull the springs back and put them onto the little latches on the side. So although it does work here, I do come in and replace that spring on the right hand side into where it needs to be, which all it does is it gives an extra bit of spring tension on the hammer. So what we're going to do, we're going to pull this bolt back out and figure out what's going on with its jankiness. And basically what it is the little fork that's supplied with the bolt is made from a very soft, I don't know if it's steel or alloy. It's made from a very soft material, so as you drag the charging handle to one side, instead of staying rigid and firm and just pushing backwards, it actually bends in. Which I'll be able to show you in just a moment. I'll show you how much spring tension's there that wants to chuck this thing out. So you'll see that I bent the back piece in, but this is what happens. So this material is just far too soft, so I end up replacing them with just the stock parts because we just want it to work and be reliable. We'll slide this on here, slide this back in. You don't actually see it in the edit, but I've actually, the first time I took that part back out and I bent it back into shape, put it in, and it happened again straight away. So I was like, right, we can't be having that. The standard one works just fine. We're just going to line this back up here and smack this pin back into place, which is a little difficult on the steel bolt because the pins, I tried to clear out as much of the corrosion as possible. It's not as nice, the charging handle, it's quite limp compared to the using the upgraded spring and fork, but at the end of the day we just want it to work. So this one is not up to the task. With that done, we can get this fitted back in. I'm just going to reapply the grease that I wiped off. Again, I wrongly apply it to the flat sections above the channel here, but don't worry, when it's in the gun I end up just wiping off the excess. Let's fit that little nozzle guide back in place, slide the bolt back in. Recoil rod assembly goes back in as well. Just trying to get it situated. I think I ended up putting it in the wrong hole, but when you put it in the right way, it lines up just fine. Snap the stock back into place. Just punch that pin that's come loose in the stock. That needs to go back in eventually. Fit the trigger pack, which has been corrected. Just trying to situate it all into position here. Pull your pins out from the back. Locate them, making sure the recoil rod assembly and everything is in position. Should go in nice and easy like that. Just testing the function here. I think I noticed that I've over greased it here, and I'm like, ah yeah, didn't need it on those surfaces. Just testing the function of the hammer assembly, so making sure semi, 2-round burst and full auto all actuate as normal, which they do. So the trigger pack has gone back together successfully. Testing the bolt lock, which seems to work. I'm going to slide the Magwell on now to line up this hole. Use the remaining pin and pop it back into the receiver. And we're going to give it a test. We're just going to wipe off the excess grease first before I forget. And we're going to give it a function check. Everything seems to be okay at this point. So we're going to grab some mags, we're going to give it a test. Initially, I couldn't get the Stanags in. These are V3 mags. So we switch over to the P mag. And let's see what happens. Bolt locks. Doesn't quite release. Doesn't want to release at all. Won't let the bolt all the way forward. Take the mag out. Drop the bolt. See what's going on. Put the mag back in with the hammer cocked. We're just gonna see what's going on here. And this is what we get. So it's very lethargic. It's almost like you can hear the air or the gas escaping around the seals of the nozzle. It's not having a great time. Can we get the thing to function? We need to find out what's going on with this thing. You can see areas on the top of the magazines where the bolt carrier is dragging across it. I try and lock the empty mag function of the magazine off, but then as you fire it, what you actually find is because the bolt's dragging across the top of the magazine, it actually ends up turning that feature off. So you'll see here it's turned it off, so the bolt is actually dragging on the top of like the fake feed lips here of the magazine. You can see the scratches there. I'm going to continue to try it, but it really doesn't seem happy. Overall, this kit has potential. I don't think it's quite ready yet. Not that I'm saying that they've rushed it. I just think it needs a bit of extra time to get right. The nozzle is very, very loose. And what I've actually done is, while I'm doing this, I'm just recording everything that I've found, and I'm going to relay it to the guys at Clutch Precision. In a positive way, you know, I do have a background in this. I really want this system to work, so hopefully any feedback I can give them can help improve this conversion kit, because I really want it to work. I want to be able to run my M4 mags in my G36 and just have it work, and being able to stow my mags properly. But unfortunately, at the moment, it just isn't quite happy. I think the nozzle needs improvement. The finish on the inside of the steel bolts does need some improvement. The Magwell, as far as I can tell, worked fine. But hopefully they do respond and they accept the feedback in good light, because that's how I don't want them to think I'm being overly critical of this thing, because that's not my intention. If it was myself, that's why I'm doing it, because if I think of it in this way, if it was myself that had done this conversion and people could, you know, sort of relay feedback and help improve it, then I would definitely be open to it. But this isn't a cheap conversion. You know, the Magwell and the nozzle is like roughly 130, 140 euros, and then the steel bolt is like another 100 plus euros as well. So it's not a cheap conversion. I do actually manage to get the Stanag to fit in here. And it does seem to work, but then what I find is as the gun locks back, it like really dorks up the bolt release. So something's quite not happy in this system. So yeah, more investigation needed. I'm going to relay what I have found back to Clutch Precision and see what they say. In its current state, I don't feel like it's quite ready. And we'll wait and see. Maybe they are really positive in terms of the feedback and I can work with them to improve the system. Maybe they're not. It's the first time I've bought off Clutch Precision, so thanks for tuning in. Hopefully this guide helps you fit in your VFC M4 Magwell conversion on your G36. And as always, from me and Bench, we'll be seeing you in the next video.